I have a question for you. Is there an issue you feel strongly about? Maybe race, religion, gender, something you've really picked a side on and you're unlikely to change your mind. Now let me ask you one more question. How do you feel about people who have the opposite view to you on that topic? How easy is it for you to feel care and compassion for those people? It isn't easy, is it? It isn't easy, but it's vital that we care about people who think differently from us. Imagine a world where it was just the norm to have friends with very different opinions from you and to have meaningful conversations with them about difficult topics, instead of being polarized as we are now. Imagine if we could find common ground, maybe even try to understand each other, maybe even work together to find solutions, instead of being stuck in the prison of our own beliefs. I'm Mia. I'm a mediator. I work with people who see things differently to help them find better solutions, better ways forwards. And I don't pick a side. And one thing I've noticed over time that really holds people back from finding solutions and from finding ways forwards is that they get very certain about their perspectives. And when I'm mediating, this is what I do. I listen. And I go and I listen to one person in one room. And I always hear a really compelling story, a really heartfelt story. And now I've come to expect this next step. I go to the other room and I hear another really compelling, heartfelt story. So, is someone lying? Sometimes, but mostly not. But everyone is very often missing a big part of the picture. And often, there are lots of misunderstandings. And I'm going to give you a really basic misunderstanding so that you can take this into your everyday life. Because we tend to be kinder to ourselves than we are to other people. I'm late because I'm stuck in traffic. You're late because you're selfish, inconsiderate, and you don't respect my time. Yeah. Familiar, huh? So when we start to see all of this, maybe we begin to understand a bit more about why polarization can happen. I've come to understand that there's something that's driving polarization. I call it selective compassion. Selective compassion is caring and feeling compassion for some people more than others. It's a very human trait. It's even evolutionary. We care more about our friends and family than we do people we don't know on the other side of the planet, more about our own child than someone else's child. It's how we survive. But selective compassion causes problems. I've mediated in the commercial sector, on political issues, on personal issues, and over again, the thing that keeps people apart is selective compassion. We care about our issues, our needs, our people, our company, our hopes, our dreams, not the other person's. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the problem, how we can fix it, and what you personally can do to unpolarize your relationships at all levels. This is what I think we should all be concerned about. Over the past 75 years, the world population has more than tripled, according to UN data. From around 2.5 billion in 1950 to over 8 billion today. So we're living closer and closer together. At the same time, there's more extreme politics in the world. For example, in the US, according to Pew Research Center, in 2022, Democrats and Republicans in Congress were more divided than ever before over the past 50 years. There's a rise in cancel culture, canceling people and talks. University campuses are canceling talks because people disagree with the views in them. And it seems easier and easier to disagree with views you haven't even bothered to engage with. We're suffering from a severe case of groupthink, where there are certain views that are considered compassionate and correct, and it doesn't seem okay to even question them. Alongside this, we're suffering from a mental health crisis. According to the WHO, depression, anxiety, and disorders are among the leading causes of illness and disability among adolescents. Social media is not responsible for all of this, but I couldn't do this talk without mentioning social media. On social media, we have echo chambers. And in these echo chambers, we hear a certain set of views, which are right and correct, but how much does that really serve us? Or how much does it silence us? Imagine being a teenager, wanting to think for yourself, maybe wanting to question some view that's correct or compassionate, or even some element of it, but feeling silenced for fear that you might be rejected or ostracized by your peers. At an evolutionary level, fear of being rejected is ultimately a fear of death. And it's not just teenagers, is it? I spent 4 years helping politicians, NGOs, and think tanks discuss the refugee crisis. As part of that, we went and visited refugee camps. We talked to the people involved. And then we had meaningful, real conversations about the real issues. And what I noticed in the wider world was that those meaningful conversations weren't happening. People were either afraid of being seen as pro or anti-refugee, or they were so stuck in one side or the other that they couldn't see the issues. When you can only see one side, you can't see the real issues. When we're polarized, we stop listening. We cancel, we criticize, we dehumanize, we even shame. We don't stop to ask, why do you think the way you think? What am I missing? Instead, we get together with people who think like us. We decide what's right, and we make everyone else wrong. Job done, nice and easy. Except it's not. Because in a world where we're living closer and closer together, we're more and more divided. But it doesn't have to be that way. There is hope. In my experience as a mediator, as soon as we begin to be open to hearing something from the other side, to learning something that we didn't know, magic can happen. I want to tell you a story about a very small moment which changed the way I think about human capacity forever. A few years ago, I was part of a group of mediators working with some Christians on a topic that's very divisive for them: homosexuality. The conversations happened over a number of days. They were hard, but they were really invaluable because they created a space where people could see each other not just as enemies, but as real human beings. And on the final day, there were two men who'd been through the whole conversations. One was a proud gay Christian man, comfortable in his faith and his identity. And the other was a man who sincerely believed that the Bible did not condone same-sex relationship, also comfortable in his faith and his identity. On the final day, they decided, without consulting anyone, that they were going to sit down and have breakfast together. Now, I wasn't at that breakfast, so I can't tell you whether they had scrambled eggs or porridge, and I also can't tell you whether their conversation was difficult or easy. I only saw what happened afterwards. I was setting up in a very large room, messing around with pens and post-it notes, and the room was pretty much empty when they walked in. They were talking quietly, and they found 2 seats together, and before they sat down, they paused. They stopped, and they did something that I hadn't expected. They hugged. It wasn't a quick or polite hug, and it wasn't for show. There was hardly anyone in the room. It was a deep, meaningful, connecting, profound hug. And in that moment, there were no divides. There were no different positions. There were just 2 human beings holding each other. And every time I think of that hug, I'm reminded of one simple truth. Sometimes, in the face of disagreement, the most radical thing we can do is to embrace the person standing across from us exactly as they are. This is where I believe we need to start. We need to be less concerned with fitting in and more concerned with including. Less concerned with blaming and more concerned with understanding. Less concerned with convincing people and more concerned with connecting with people. Because when we manage to override our selective compassion, extraordinary things can happen. I want to tell you about a remarkable man. He's one of my heroes. His name is Daryl Davis. He's a very talented American musician. And he's black. And this is very relevant for what I'm about to tell you. Over the past 30 years, Daryl has spent time befriending members of the KKK, the Ku Klux Klan, a white supremacist organization. And he's responsible, directly or indirectly, for over 200 people leaving the Klan. I love what President Bill Clinton says about him. He says, "Daryl is an interesting fellow. He went and met members with the Ku Klux Klan and talked to them, and he lived to tell a tale." Not only did Daryl meet with members of the KKK, he was invited to a KKK rally, and he attended. And if you Google him, you'll see a photo of him on the internet in the dark, standing next to a man in hooded white robes with fires burning in the background. He didn't just survive, he made real friendships. And on the back of Daryl's book, there's a quote from a man that really touches me. He was a former KKK Grand Dragon, and he says, "I'm proud to call Daryl Davis my friend." Proud. So I got curious. I wanted to understand, how did Daryl make these friendships? And I can tell you this, he didn't cancel people. He didn't bludgeon them with criticism. He went out and he met them in social settings. He got to know them. He was interested in them. He got to understand them. And he says that he never wanted to convince people to leave the KKK. He just wanted the answer to one simple question. How can you hate me when you don't even know me? On his social media, he says, You learn a lot more from people who don't agree with you than from those who do. This is the kind of world that I want to live in. A world where, despite our deep differences, we can see our humanity. A world where we move beyond our selective compassion, beyond our opinions and our self-righteousness. Because hearts and minds are not forged overnight, but friendships and respect can be. However bad you think someone's opinion is, there's always a reason for it, grounded in anything from culture to trauma. So let's stop demonizing people and start connecting with them and feeling care and compassion towards them. We have a tendency to associate people with their opinions. Why? Opinions can change, and people are so much more than that. Brené Brown says that it's easier to hurt people than it is to feel our own vulnerability. And when I think of that, I think it's easier to cancel people than to have the courage to feel uncomfortable. So I'm going to ask you to do 3 things. But first, I need you to think of a person. So think of a person who has a different view to you. Maybe you know them, maybe you don't know them. Maybe you're just imagining them. Maybe it's someone you've fallen out with. Everyone got someone? Okay. First, don't think of them as bad because their opinion is something you think is bad. Opinions can change, and people are more than their opinions. Second, humanize them. Don't dehumanize. Look at what you have in common, not just what the differences are. And third, don't ever assume you understand someone's opinion until you've listened to it, you've asked them about it. Ask them about it. Ask them why they think the way they think. Try to understand. This is how I believe we'll change the world. By caring about people who have different opinions from us. So that's all I ask. That we aim to see our selective compassion and aim to move beyond it. Think of Darryl and the 2 Christian men and ask yourself, how can you hate or even dislike someone when you don't even know them? Thank you.